The Dark Knight trilogy is home to some of the most iconic scenes in superhero movies. One moment that comes to mind is the climactic scene where we're given this fast-paced fight scene on a speeding train as Batman has to take on one of the world's deadliest assassins, Deadshot.
So predictable.
Yeah, turns out the name Dark Knight Trilogy isn't entirely accurate. While there are only 3 movies that are undebatably canon and part of Christopher Nolan's overall vision, there was actually one additional installment released between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight that took the form of an anime anthology film. I'm of course referring to Batman Gotham Knight. Don't feel bad if you haven't heard of it. It's a film from DC's lesser-known line of direct-to-video animated films, many of which are extremely good, but generally don't attract much attention from those who aren't actively seeking them out. Still, just because a spin-off film isn't as prolific as one of the most famous trilogies ever made, that doesn't mean it's not worth your time or a valuable addition to that movie's universe. So let's take a look and see if Gotham Knight is capable of standing alongside the big bats. Like I said, this film is an anthology consisting of 6 stories, each with its own writer, director, and animation studio. Appropriate then that the first storyline we're given is titled, Have I Got a Story for You? The plot involves a bunch of kids all claiming to have seen Batman in action and giving their own account of what he's like, with each seeing him as some sort of force of nature rather than just a guy in a costume. It's an interesting premise to start off with, considering that one of the major themes of Batman Begins was about Bruce Wayne inspiring hope in a deeply hopeless city by making them perceive him as something more than what he is.
As a symbol, I can be incorruptible. I can be everlasting.
So it is a neat idea to see the receiving end of that. It's something that other Batman stories have tackled, with different people sharing theories about him based on what they've heard or seen.
The guy tried to bolt, and the Batman just pointed at him. Wham! He drops. It was unbelievable.
With that in mind, I was initially a little confused about how these kids are misinterpreting Batman as inhuman, considering they're shown looking at him up close in broad daylight. But the story makes the very clever decision of being told by children with overactive imaginations, deliberately making stuff up for dramatic effect.
Batman never cut nobody's head off.
I'm making it more colorful, yo.
The actual interpretations we see in this story, though, are just okay. There are some cool ideas, like portraying Batman as this shadow creature, this humanoid bat monster, man-bat basically, and as an armed robot. They all sound potentially cool, but not a lot is really done with them. Each different interpretation is given one minor aspect to differentiate from the real Batman, but it doesn't feel like they came up with enough ideas to justify a full story about them. That and the kids who are telling these stories and the overarching villain throughout are not particularly interesting, which damages a lot of the appeal. My advice for this short, just watch Legends of the Dark Knight from the animated series. It's basically the same premise and the vignettes are a lot more interesting.
Yeah, whatever.
And sadly, the next few stories don't end up being much better. The second story, titled Crossfire, is told from the perspective of 2 GCPD detectives, Crispus Allen and Anna Ramirez, who have differing viewpoints on the police actively working with a vigilante. Allen thinking it's antithetical to their goal of stopping crime and corruption, and Ramirez thinking he's a desperately needed force for good in Gotham. They eventually find themselves trapped in the middle of a gang war between Salvatore Maroni and a Russian mob boss named Yuri Dimitrov. He's apparently not the Russian mobster from The Dark Knight, which was admittedly a bit confusing. But anyway, Batman shows up just in the nick, saving Allen and Ramirez and bringing an end to the shootout. It's not a bad idea necessarily, but for me, the problem is that the story is way too simplistic and nothing that hasn't been done way better in other Batman media. The police are unwilling to work with a vigilante like Batman, but then they see him in action and decide, you know what, maybe he's alright. The thing is, in other Batman stories when this theme is implemented, there's usually some exploration of why someone would be against Batman and what eventually wins them over. The episode Trial from the animated series examines the possibility that Batman's presence perpetuates crime rather than reducing it. Arkham Origins shows a young Jim Gordon viewing Batman's vigilantism as a threat to his goal of maintaining order in an already corrupt city. This story just doesn't have anything to say for itself apart from, I don't like Batman because he's a criminal, and then, oh, he stops worse criminals. Okay, fair enough. Not only is it predictable, it's also just not very interesting. And it's not helped by the fact that these two cops basically serve no purpose in the story other than just to give Batman someone to save, and they can be grateful. The third story, Field Test, features Batman once again going up against Maroni and the Russian with the use of a new force field gadget developed by Lucius Fox. And it's this story here where I have to make note of the voice acting. Batman in this film is voiced by the late great Kevin Conroy, who voiced the character for 3 decades in TV shows, movies, video games, etc., and is a fan favorite for good reason.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman.
He's mostly pretty good in this movie as well, apart from one other issue that I'll get into in a bit. But as much as I usually love him, I don't like his performance in this particular short. He's fine as Batman, but when he has to be playing old Bruce Wayne in this short, I don't think the line deliveries fit the character. It's a little too peppy sounding and doesn't match the brooding, focused attitude that I'd expect from Bruce Wayne.
I wondered if I could fill in for you at that charity golf tournament Ronald Marshall is holding. He's someone I'd like to meet. I like the Shade. The Waycom satellite orients itself using gyroscopic electromagnetic navigation. This circuit is what generates the field, correct?
One thing I did enjoy in this story, though, was how Batman defeated Maroni and the Russian. Picking back up with the gang war between them, Batman steps in to stop the fighting, but runs into the issue that without actual evidence to prosecute, he can't really do much aside from punch them. So he settles for temporary peace the only way he can. He defeats them in battle, pulling the old strike fear into the hearts of the guilty card, and then uses that fear to coerce a reluctant truce out of them until he can find a more permanent solution.
You get the docks. You stay in the slums. That's the arrangement until I get something on you.
It's a realistic issue that a superhero like Batman would run into, and seeing him sort of forcibly cooperate with them is a clever and outside-the-box solution. Aside from that, there's a plot point where Batman's force field deflects a bullet into another person, and he decides not to use it anymore for fear of killing someone. Honestly, I debated on whether to even mention this part because I have nothing to really say about it, but that's kind of a problem considering it's what the story is about. The overall plot is about Batman trying a new gadget, it doesn't work how he wants it to, so he stops using it, and that's the end. Okay, so what? Nothing's been learned and nothing's changed, so why is this deserving of an entire story? The fourth story, In Darkness Dwells, was actually written by David S. Goyer, who is a writer for the main Dark Knight trilogy. And in a way, you can see that influence with the inclusion of the Scarecrow, who was a villain in Batman Begins, but not the most developed, and the sequels didn't exactly help in that regard. It's good to see the character get another chance, considering that there have been some pretty damn good Scarecrows in other continuities. Well, it would be nice, except even in animation, where the potential for Scarecrow is limitless, they still do practically nothing with him. Also, Killer Croc appears for a fight and then almost immediately leaves while adding nothing to the plot. His role in the story is so minuscule and meaningless that it makes the live-action Killer Croc look like a one-man show. I don't know, I'm really struggling with this one. Much like the last story, it doesn't feel like any kind of point is being made here. There's no character arc or elaborate plot, it's just a case of Batman goes into the sewer, fights Scarecrow, and then the story ends. At least with the last story, there was an arc with the force field gadget, even if it did feel pointless. This story just has nothing to say to where I really don't understand why they made it. The fifth story, Working Through Pain, involves a series of flashbacks from before Bruce Wayne became Batman and training under a woman named Cassandra on managing pain. This is something that could be interesting. Going back to the Dark Knight trilogy, learning all the logistics and ideology behind how Batman came to be was one of the best elements of Batman Begins. It doesn't exactly end up being all that engaging though. The story goes into the idea of being so calm and of sound mind that pain is barely a concern.
Pain cannot be overcome.
No, but it can be put in its place.
But there isn't really much insight into what goes into achieving that or how Bruce attempts it. We get some brief glimpses of him meditating in uncomfortable scenarios, but not really much else. Cassandra isn't that interesting of a character either. She's basically just the generic, stoic, wise mentor archetype without much all that interesting about her. They try to give her a tragic backstory, but you could honestly cut it and not miss anything. There is a bit of an interesting idea at the end with Bruce being unable to complete his training because he isn't of sound mind, and for the purposes of training to be Batman, it's not what he has as a goal.
For your pain is leading you down a path you desire.
It's an interesting idea, but again, it's not really fleshed out all that much. The story partially explores how Batman's tortured frame of mind is obsessive and self-destructive, showing that he's unable to find peace, but it's an idea that doesn't get much of a climactic end. Much like a lot of these stories, it presents something that could potentially be an interesting idea, and then just stops. The sixth and final story, simply titled Deadshot, is overall... Hey wait, why was the first story the only one to have a unique title card? Anyway, is overall okay. It follows Batman taking on Deadshot, who's been hired to assassinate Jim Gordon.
Just another cop kill.
I'll give credit that the short does have some decent, ominous atmosphere in the beginning, and the fight scene between Batman and Deadshot is alright. But the story still has its fair share of problems. While the atmosphere is decent at first, there isn't a ton of escalating tension leading up to the fight scene, which makes the build-up feel a little monotonous after a while. And while the fight between Batman and Deadshot is kind of fun, there also isn't any real substance to it. There's no ideological conflict between the two, there's no character flaw that Batman has to overcome to win. It just feels like the short exists just for the sake of an action scene and not a ton else. I enjoyed it more than the other stories, but I think I've made it clear that that's a low bar. So with these storylines out of the way, I can't exactly say this lives up to the Dark Knight trilogy that it supposedly shares a continuity with. Although, now that I've watched all these stories again, I do have one final question. Why, and more to the point, how, is this connected to the Dark Knight trilogy? Watching all these stories, any connections you're able to make are tenuous if you want to be really generous. I mean, the first story is about some random citizens talking about who or what Batman is, which is a story you could do in just about any Batman continuity. It doesn't visually resemble the trilogy, with Batman being given several Batsuit designs and none of them are the suit from Batman Begins. Bruce Wayne in a couple of these shorts barely even looks like Bruce Wayne, let alone Christian Bale specifically. Speaking of which, he doesn't sound like Christian Bale either. Again, no disrespect to Conroy, but his Batman voice and Bale's Batman voice do not sound similar.
It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me.
Jonathan Crane, aka the Scarecrow. It has to be. He's been at large since that night in the Narrows.
That's doubly a problem for Alfred, who in this movie just sounds like any generic version of the character and not Michael Caine, one of the most distinct voices in the world.
Some men just want to watch the world burn.
It's a bag full of tragedy, that's what it is.
Rachel Dawes, an original character from the trilogy, is never seen or even mentioned, and the film features a number of sci-fi and just generally heightened reality concepts that don't match up with the more realistic tone of that trilogy. You might say that this movie isn't supposed to be considered integral to those other ones, but if you're gonna pay such little adherence to the continuity you're apparently adding to, then why even make the connection at all? It might have seemed like I was skimming through some of these segments, and initially that's what I thought I was doing as well. I even went back and watched the movie again while writing the script because what I'd written seemed so bare bones, I figured I must be forgetting something. But after checking, no, I'm really not. Pretty much all these plot lines are technically stories, but they're lacking in so many aspects like character development, theming, rising tension, anything that would make these stories stand out as something worthwhile. Put simply, this may technically be part of the critically acclaimed Dark Knight trilogy, but it's not who you are underneath. It's what you do that defines you. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters Heather Reed, Zelda, Moon Goddesses, Blueberry Cello, Seth M, Chris Spicer, and Jacob K. Thank you so much for the support. If you'd like to see your name in the credits, along with early access to scripts and videos, as well as exclusive unused video thumbnails, or if you'd just like to chat with me, consider supporting me on Patreon for just $1.50 a month. The link is in the description.